An ancient oak tree hums a forgotten melody each night. Elara is a young archivist devoted to preserving lost tales, and this mysterious sound calls to her deepest passion. She lives a quiet, predictable life, but the humming promises answers to questions her own family has refused to ask for generations. By choosing to investigate, she risks her entire comfortable world for a single chance at the truth. This decision will pull her into a realm where stories are alive and breathing, completely blurring the line between a waking dream and tangible reality. By the end of this journey, you will discover how forgotten myths hold the power to reshape our own world. What forgotten song might be waiting just beyond the edge of your own hearing? The humming was a thread of sound woven through the night air, and Elara had no choice but to follow it. It led her directly to the gnarled base of the ancient oak, where a curtain of glowing moss shimmered with a soft, blue-green light. As she reached out, her fingers trembling, the thick roots seemed to sigh and shift, pulling back from the dark earth to reveal a narrow opening. It was an invitation and a demand. She took a breath and stepped down into the cool, waiting darkness. The moment her feet found purchase on a rough-hewn step, the roots groaned back into place, sealing the entrance with a finality that echoed in the sudden silence. She was trapped. The familiar night was gone, replaced by a crushing weight of earth and stone. A cold spike of claustrophobia pierced her chest, her breath catching in the tight space. Yet, beneath that fear, the melody persisted, a faint but steady pull on her spirit. It was the sound of every question her family had ever silenced, every story deemed too old to matter. That curiosity was a flame she could not extinguish. Pushing the panic down, she made her choice. She would follow the song. With one hand on the cool, damp wall to steady herself, Elara moved forward into the consuming dark, letting the whisper of the tune be her only guide. The tunnel floor began to slope downward, a gentle but insistent descent that carried her further from everything she knew. The air changed, growing heavy with the scent of aged parchment and something else, a crisp, electric tang that could only be magic. Just as the darkness felt absolute, the humming coalesced into a distinct, soft lullaby, its notes clear and comforting. And then she saw it, a spill of warm, golden light painting the end of the passage, promising not just an answer, but a world. Golden light washed over her, and the air itself seemed to exhale. Elara stood at the edge of an impossible chamber, a cavern so vast its ceiling was lost in a soft gloom. Bookshelves were not built but grown, their wood twisted into elegant arches and spirals, holding countless volumes that shimmered with a faint, sleeping luminescence. Through the still air, small spheres of light, like captive the wisps, drifted on unseen currents, casting shifting patterns across the endless rows. The humming was gone, replaced by a profound, breathing silence. Her eyes were drawn to one book in particular, its leather spine etched with silver filigree that pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic light, as if the story within was dreaming. Without thinking, her hand rose, her fingertips brushing the warm cover. The moment she made contact, the book did not so much open as it unfolded. Its pages bloomed like a flower, and a phantom narrative spilled into the air around her. A miniature forest of silver birch and foxglove shimmered into being, and she watched the silent, graceful dance of a fable she had only ever seen in faded ink. spectral deer with antlers of woven vines stepped through the spectral trees, and she could feel the story's sorrow and its hope as if they were her own. This was no mere recording. The library was not an archive. It was a sanctuary, a place where stories came to rest, to sleep and dream themselves anew. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. She was an intruder here, a waking presence in a realm of slumber. A single misplaced breath, a too loud footstep, and she could shatter the delicate dream of 1,000 tales. The weight of her own presence felt suddenly immense and dangerous. She pulled her hand back slowly, carefully, as the last echoes of the forest fable faded back into the book's pages. Her earlier curiosity was now tempered by a deep, reverent caution. She would not charge through this sacred space. She would not grab or demand. Her only choice was to become a student of this place, to walk with infinite care and learn its silent rules through observation and respect. She made a conscious decision to move as a whisper, her feet finding the softest patches of moss-covered floor, her breathing deliberately slow and quiet. But this new understanding heightened the stakes dramatically. These stories were not inert. They were alive, each one a slumbering consciousness, and she, Elara, was now a variable in their collective rest. Her every action rippled through the quiet air. Then, from the deepest reaches of the library, a new sound reached her. It was a soft, rhythmic thrum, a low and steady pulse that felt less like a sound and more like a vibration in her bones. It was the heartbeat of this living place, and it was calling her further in, drawing her toward the very core of the mystery. A creature of woven starlight and soft shadow was tending the shelves. It had the elegant form of a great lynx, its movements fluid and silent as it used careful paws to nudge a slumbering book into its proper place. Elara froze, her breath caught in her chest. This was no mere beast. It was a guardian, a being of pure, concentrated purpose. It stilled, its head tilting, and then it turned. Two pools of liquid nebula fixed upon her. The Somnus Lynx did not growl or bristle. It simply flowed from the shelves and paced toward her, each step a whisper on the moss. A primal instinct screamed for her to run, to hide from this majestic and terrifying presence. Yet a deeper, more profound need held her rooted. She had to understand. She had to know why she was here. As it drew near, its cool, star-filled breath ghosted over her skin, and it sniffed the air around her with a deep, probing curiosity. It was sampling the scent of her world, the dust of forgotten questions she carried. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum in the profound quiet. Every muscle was taut with the urge to flee, but she thought of the dreaming stories, of their fragile state, and she knew that fear was a clumsy, destructive force here. Instead of stepping back, she made a choice that defined her entire journey. She slowly, deliberately raised her hand, palm open and empty, in a gesture of peaceful greeting. It was not an attempt to touch, but an offering of her intent. The lynx regarded her upturned palm, then her face. A voice, cool and clear as a mountain stream, flowed directly into her mind. You carry the scent of the outer world, little echo, a world that forgets. The stories here grow thin. They fade when the dreamers above stop listening. Your arrival is not random. It is a symptom of the decay. The stakes of her presence snapped into a terrifying, crystalline focus. This was not a passive collection of tales. It was a living ecosystem, and it was dying of neglect. Her world's collective amnesia was a poison seeping into these sacred halls. The lynx turned, its starlit form glimmering, and with a flick of its tufted tail, it gestured for her to follow. It padded away, leading her deeper into the library, toward a section where the shelves seemed older, the wood more gnarled, and the light from the sleeping books flickered with a weary, fading rhythm. The air in this part of the library was stale and thin. Elara followed the Somnus Lynx past towering shelves where the books slept fitfully, their covers filmed with dust, and their once bright spines now the color of ash. The gentle luminescence that pulsed from their pages was faint, a flickering heartbeat on the verge of stillness. One volume, smaller than the rest, lay with its cover slightly ajar, as if gasping for breath. Driven by a desperate need to understand, she reached out, her touch as light as a moth's wing upon its brittle pages. The moment her fingers made contact, the entire book dissolved into a fine, gray powder. A single, silvery wisp of memory escaped the collapse, carrying the faint scent of rain on dry soil and the echo of a child's laugh before it, too, vanished into the silent air. A wave of desolation washed over her, so profound it felt like a physical wound. This was not just paper and ink. A world, a feeling, a unique way of seeing had just ceased to exist, and its extinction left a cold, hollow space in the world. The guilt was immediate and crushing. Her world, her people, her own family's silence had done this. Their collective forgetfulness was a slow, insidious poison, and she was standing amidst the ruins it had created. She looked from the pile of dust at her feet to the patient, starlit gaze of the lynx. "I cannot just watch them fade," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I will help. I will find a way to bring these stories back." The vow was not a grand proclamation, but a quiet, solemn oath that changed everything. She was no longer a visitor. She was now a guardian, a participant in a struggle for survival. The stakes were no longer abstract. If this library fell silent, a fundamental thread in the tapestry of existence would unravel, taking with it the magic, the wonder, and the very history that gave the world above its hidden depth. She felt the weight of that responsibility settle on her shoulders, a burden she now chose to carry. The lynx regarded her for a long moment, its nebula eyes seeming to measure the truth of her words. Then it lowered its great head and, with infinite gentleness, used its nose to nudge a single book from a high shelf. This tome was different. While its neighbors languished, its leather cover, tooled with constellations she did not recognize, still held a soft, determined glow. It drifted down to land softly at her feet. She knelt, her fingers tracing the title etched in deep, silver letters. It read, "The Lullaby of the First Dreamers." The lullaby of the first dreamers felt warm and alive in her hands. Elara carefully opened the cover, and instead of a phantom landscape, a complex, soothing melody poured forth. It was a sound woven from the very fabric of memory, a tune that felt both ancient and intimately familiar. Without conscious thought, her lips began to move, humming along with the simple, repeating phrases. Her mind effortlessly mapped the patterns, absorbing the rhythm and pitch as if she had known it all her life. As the sound vibrated in her chest, something miraculous happened. The dim books on the nearby shelves flickered, their faint light pulsing a little brighter, a little stronger in response to the familiar tune. A fragile thread of connection was forming, a resonance between her remembrance and their slumbering power. But a cold doubt quickly chased the wonder. Was her simple humming, this small human act, truly enough to counter an entire world's forgetting? The sheer scale of the loss felt overwhelming, making her own effort feel like a single drop of water against a vast, parched desert. The weight of the library's silence pressed in, threatening to smother her fragile hope. She pushed the doubt aside, gripping the book more firmly. If this melody was a key, then she would learn it completely. She closed her eyes, shutting out the decaying grandeur around her, and poured all her concentration into the music. She focused on every note, every subtle shift in tempo, committing the entire lullaby to the deepest part of her memory. The mental effort was immense, a draining kind of magic that left her feeling hollowed out and lightheaded. Each phrase she internalized felt like lifting a great weight, and she began to worry about the personal cost of wielding such an ancient power. Could a single person bear the burden of remembering for everyone? Exhaustion finally claimed her, and she gently closed the book, the last notes of the lullaby still echoing softly in the quiet air. The Somnus Lynx observed her weary stance, and then turned, leading her to a small nook woven from the library's own living roots. It was a cozy hollow, lined with soft moss and bathed in a gentle, ambient glow. As she settled into its embrace, the profound melody continued its quiet loop in her mind, a promise of restoration and a guide for the work yet to come. The melody of the lullaby was the river that carried her into sleep. Elara did not simply dream. She stepped across a threshold into a landscape woven from fragile memory. A wide, starlit river flowed before her, its waters dark and shimmering with reflected constellations. A lone, spectral boat was stranded near the shore, and a ferryman, made of mist and sorrow, paced its length, his hands empty. "I cannot pole the boat," he murmured to the silent night, his voice the sound of a story forgotten mid-sentence. "My oar is lost to the current." Elara understood this was not her dream to observe, but a narrative to complete. She waded into the cool, starry water, her movements slow so as not to disturb the delicate dream stuff. Her fingers brushed against something smooth and solid lodged in the silty bottom. She pulled, and a simple oar of pale wood emerged, its surface etched with the same constellations that glittered on the water. She offered it to the ferryman. His form solidified as his hands closed around the shaft, and for a single, perfect moment, the entire myth felt whole and true. Then the river, the boat, and the ferryman dissolved into a shower of soft light. She woke in the root nook, the scent of night-blooming flowers and damp earth clinging to her. Her eyes flew to the shelves. There, a book bound in what looked like river-smooth stone, now glowed with a steady, soft blue light, its radiance noticeably stronger than before. A thrill of success was instantly tempered by a deep, unsettling uncertainty. Had she helped, or had she intruded? She had reached into a story and altered its course. Was she a restorer, or was she bending these fragile dreams to her own will? The line between herself and the library's magic was blurring, and it filled her with both wonder and fear. Yet, seeing the renewed light in that single book was a powerful argument against hesitation. She made a conscious, deliberate choice. Her sleep would no longer be for rest alone. It would be her workshop, her most vital tool for healing the library. she would become a dream weaver, intentionally walking these slumbering narratives to mend their broken parts. This decision came with a tangible cost. She felt hollowed, as if part of her own vitality had flowed into that starlit river to make it real. A profound weariness clung to her bones, a mental fatigue that whispered of the danger. She could not do this endlessly. Each act of repair drew from her own well of energy, and if she poured too much too quickly, she would have nothing left to give. Pushing herself up, the resolve hardening within her, she went in search of the Somnus Lynx. She needed to learn control, to understand how to walk the dreams without losing herself completely in the process. She found the Somnus Lynx waiting beside a still pool of liquid moonlight that had gathered in a great stone basin. Its surface was a perfect mirror, reflecting the starlit creature and the endless, dreaming shelves. Elara knelt, her own reflection a pale, determined face amidst the shimmering silver. "I have a proposal," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "Let me be a conduit. I will take the stories I can revive, the ones I can remember, and I will carry them back to the waking world. I will share them, speak them, and weave them into the lives of those who have forgotten. In return, I ask for your guidance. I cannot do this alone. I need to learn how to mend these dreams without shattering them or losing myself." The lynx regarded her, its nebula eyes unblinking. The silence stretched, filled only by the faint, sleeping breath of the library. Then it gave a slow, deliberate nod, a pact, then little echo. The voice flowed into her mind, cool and solemn. A pact of remembrance. It leaned forward, and from the starlight between its eyes, a single, silvery thread of pure light unspooled. It reached out, touching her forehead with a sensation like a cool drop of dew. For a single, breathtaking moment, she felt the entire, vast weight of the library's memory, not as a crushing burden, but as a shared responsibility. The connection faded, but the echo of it remained, a new awareness humming just beneath her thoughts. The weight of the promise settled deep within her bones. She was no longer a temporary visitor or a hopeful restorer. She had bound her own life, her own story, to the fate of this place. There was no turning back, no safe return to a life of quiet predictability. The long-term consequences were a terrifying unknown. What would it cost to carry these tales? How would they change her? She pushed the fear aside, grounding herself in the one power she now possessed. To seal her vow, she stood and turned to face the quiet cavern. She closed her eyes, drew a steadying breath, and began to speak. She gave voice to the first story she had revived, the tale of the starlit river and the ferryman of mist. She did not simply recite it. She poured the memory of the cool water, the feeling of the smooth oar, and the ferryman's relief into her words, offering the narrative back to the slumbering library as a gift. As she spoke, she felt the air around her stir, a gentle, approving sigh that rustled the pages of 1,000 books. The personal stakes were now absolute. Her failure would not just mean the continued fading of stories. It would mean breaking a sacred bond, a betrayal that would surely snap the last, fragile threads holding this place together. Her success was the library's only hope. Emboldened by the pact and the act of speaking her first story aloud, she turned back to the patient lynx. Her voice was soft, but firm with resolve. "Show me the one that needs me most. Take me to the story that is closest to being lost forever. The Somnus Lynx led her to a pedestal of polished obsidian, isolated in a circle of profound quiet. Upon it rested a single book, its cover the flat, matte gray of long-dead embers. This was the Tome of the Silent Moon. Elara reached out, her fingers hovering just above the binding. A deep, aching cold radiated from it, the chill of absolute stillness. She placed her palm flat upon the cover and felt nothing. No flicker of a dream, no whisper of a narrative heartbeat. It was a void. Desperation clawed at her. She leaned close and began to hum the first lullaby, pouring every ounce of her will, every remembered note, into the silent space between them. The melody, which had sparked light in other books, fell upon this one and died, absorbed without a trace. The story was not sleeping. It was in a coma, too far gone for simple remembrance. A cold dread settled in her stomach. Some losses, it seemed, were permanent. The finality of it threatened to break her. If this foundational tale, the myth of the silent moon, could be lost forever, then what hope was there for any of them? The library's survival depended on the strength of its core narratives. Let this one fade completely, and the entire structure could unravel like a snipped thread, collapsing shelf by shelf into dust. She could not, would not, accept that. Simple humming from the outside was not enough. If the story would not come to her, she would have to go to it. She looked from the lifeless tome to the patient, starlit guardian. "I have to go inside," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I have to walk its dream, or what is left of it. It is the only way." The lynx nebula eyes held hers, and in them she saw the reflection of the immense risk. To project her consciousness into a narrative so faded was to step into a collapsing world. She could become trapped in the silence, her own mind unraveling along with the last fragments of the tale. Yet the lynx gave a slow, grave nod. It would act as her anchor, a tether of starlight to pull her back if the dream broke apart around her. This was the true test of their pact. Elara lay down on the cool moss beside the obsidian pedestal, the silent tome within arm's reach. She closed her eyes, pushing past the fear, focusing all her intent not on remembering the story, but on becoming a part of it. With the lynx a steady, cool presence beside her, she let her awareness fall forward into the waiting emptiness, deliberately pouring her consciousness into the book's dormant pages. The world was a study in gray. Elara stood on a plain of frozen, silvery tears, beneath a sky where a fractured moon hung like a shard of broken glass. No wind whispered, no water flowed. The only sound was a profound, aching silence that pressed against her ears. In the distance, a figure of pure, pale light sat, hunched over, its form flickering weakly. This was the lunar deity, and it was mourning the loss of its own voice, the song that had once given this myth its light and rhythm. The story was not just sleeping, it was grieving itself to death. Her task was immediate and tactile. Scattered across this monochrome wasteland were 3 points of soft, golden light, echoes of the deity's stolen song. She moved toward the first, her steps cautious. The ground was treacherous, littered with sharp fragments of shattered crystal that crunched underfoot, each one a piece of a broken melody. Worse were the patches of absolute narrative silence, voids of deeper gray that seemed to suck the very thought from her mind. Straying too close to one, she felt a terrifying numbness, a sense that her own story was beginning to unravel at the edges. The external struggle to navigate this decaying dreamscape was mirrored by an internal one. The deity's sorrow was a thick fog in the air, seeping into her, whispering that all stories end, that all light fades. It tested the very hope that had brought her here, tempting her to simply sit down and mourn alongside it. But she remembered her pact. She could not simply grab the echoes and run. She had to reconnect the threads. As she approached the flickering deity, she did not speak of the mission. Instead, she sat beside it and began to share her own memories. She spoke of her grandmother, humming an old, wordless tune, of the comfort of a story read by lamplight, of the simple, human magic of a shared lullaby. She offered these small, personal fragments as gifts, not to fix the deity, but to show it that it was not alone in its longing for connection. The first echo was nestled inside a geode of frozen tears. She reached in, and the moment her fingers closed around the warm, humming light, a single, clear note rang out, briefly pushing back the gray. The second was caught in the branches of a tree made of twisted crystal, and retrieving it cost her a cut on her palm, a stinging reminder that this dream could inflict real pain. With each echo gathered, the deity's form grew slightly more steady, but the world around them grew more unstable, as if the myth itself was resisting the healing. When she found the final echo, cradled in the deity's own hands, the entire dreamscape began to violently shudder. The ground cracked, and the voids of silence expanded like hungry mouths. It was not enough to simply return the pieces. The old song was broken. In a moment of pure instinct, she did not hand the echoes back. Instead, she held all three glowing fragments and began to weave them together with the melody of the first lullaby from the waking world. She created a new song, one that held the old memory, but also her own hope, a hybrid melody born of two worlds. She offered this new lullaby to the lunar deity, not as a restoration, but as a rebirth. The new lullaby left her lips, a fragile thread of sound in the vast gray silence. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a single, vibrant note of pure silver pierced the stillness, and the world dissolved into a cascade of color and music. The frozen plain melted into a sea of luminous, moon-kissed flowers. The fractured moon in the sky knitted itself back together, swelling into a perfect, radiant orb that poured forth a symphony of light. The lunar deity rose, its form no longer a flicker, but a brilliant pillar of sound and luminescence, and it sang. Its voice was the crescendo of 1,000 restored dreams, a wave of pure, triumphant energy that shattered the last remnants of the silence and hurled Elara backward out of the dream. She woke with a sharp gasp on the mossy floor, her body trembling, her ears still ringing with the echoes of that impossible song. Her eyes flew to the obsidian pedestal. The Tome of the Silent Moon, once gray and cold, now pulsed with a soft, steady, silver light, its cover shimmering as if wet with fresh dew. The story was not just saved. It was alive, more vibrant than it had likely been in centuries. A wave of exhaustion, so profound it felt like a physical blow, washed over her. Every muscle ached, and her mind felt scraped raw, the price for channeling such a monumental act of creation. She had not merely remembered a story, she had helped rewrite it, pouring a piece of her own spirit into its very fabric. Yet, as she lay there breathing in the scent of revived magic, a slow smile spread across her face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated joy. In that moment, she was no longer just an archivist who preserved the past. She was a healer, a creator. Her purpose was now irrevocably etched into her soul. This successful revival was a definitive proof that her method worked, that a human will, bonded to the library's magic, could reverse the decay. But such a brilliant act of restoration could not go unnoticed. She had not just mended a book, she had sent a shockwave through the library's delicate ecology, a beacon announcing her presence to every slumbering consciousness within it. The Somnus Lynx stood over her, its own form appearing more solid, its starlight brighter and more concentrated, as if strengthened by the success of their pact. It did not speak into her mind. Instead, it gently nudged her shoulder with its cool, starry nose, then turned its gaze toward a different, distant section of the library. The air there hummed with a new, curious energy, a sensation not of fading dreams, but of intense, watchful wakefulness. Something ancient had taken notice, and it was waiting. A soft, shimmering light brushed against her closed eyelids. Elara opened her eyes to a breathtaking sight. Dozens of gentle, luminous forms floated in the air around her, their shapes shifting from tiny, fluttering birds to wisps of cloud and starlight. These were the narrative spirits of the stories she had already helped restore, drawn to the resonant magic that now pulsed within her. They were not silent. A faint, collective humming filled the air, a chorus of their individual lullabies weaving together into a delicate, comforting symphony. One, resembling a small fox made of autumn leaves, nudged a book from a nearby shelf, its pages glowing with a weak, faltering light. Another, a shimmering orb of liquid moonlight, drifted toward a different tome, pulsing softly as if to say, "This one needs you next." The pressure was immediate and immense. She was no longer a lone restorer, working in quiet corners. She had become a beacon, a focal point for the hopes of every story struggling to survive. The weight of their collective expectation settled on her shoulders, a stark contrast to the solitary purpose she had embraced before. Could she truly be what they needed? What if her strength failed and she let them all down? The fear was a cold knot in her chest. But as she looked at their gentle, hopeful lights, she understood that refusing their help would be a different kind of failure. She made a conscious choice. Instead of bearing the burden alone, she would share it. She opened her hands, a gesture of welcome, and let the collaborative process begin. The spirits swirled around her in a joyful dance, their individual hums guiding her to specific books, their faint, empathic touches conveying the emotional core of each fading tale. The work became a conversation, a shared act of remembrance that was far more powerful than her solitary efforts. With their help, the revival of the library accelerated. Books that would have taken her days to understand were illuminated in moments by the spirits who knew them best. The progress was tangible, the air growing thicker with magic, and the soft sounds of breathing narratives. Yet this beautiful collaboration raised the stakes to a terrifying new height. Her failure would no longer be a personal disappointment. It would shatter this newly formed community of stories, devastating the very spirits who had placed their trust in her. Their collective fate was now inextricably tied to her own. As this new rhythm of work settled around her, one narrative spirit, a brilliant spindle of woven sunlight, detached itself from the group. It pulsed with a distinct, urgent rhythm, then drifted away from the main shelves, beckoning her to follow. It led her toward a part of the library she had never seen, where the air grew still and the shelves were carved from ancient black stone, their contents humming with a deep, primordial energy. The spindle of sunlight pulsed before a wall of ancient, thorny vines, each barb as dark as obsidian and as sharp as a forgotten promise. This was no ordinary shelf, but a sealed archway, barring entrance to the legendary Archive of Origins. Elara reached out, but the thorns did not yield. They pressed back with a cold, intelligent resistance, a warning that this was a threshold that could not be crossed by force or simple curiosity. The Somnus Lynx stood beside her, its starlit gaze solemn. It conveyed without words that this archive, which held the first stories ever dreamed, would only open for one who understood narratives not as artifacts to be collected, but as living, breathing entities that grow and change. The Guardian was not testing her power, but her philosophy. Could she prove that her work was not about preservation, but about participation? The pressure was immense. Behind that wall lay the foundational magic of the entire realm, the primal sources from which all other myths flowed. To be turned away now would be to forever work at the edges, never reaching the core. Access could mean a permanent solution, a way to anchor the library's future against the tides of forgetting. Failure would mean that her best efforts might only ever be a temporary delay of the inevitable decay. Elara looked from the impassive thorns to her own hands, still faintly humming with the collaborative energy of the narrative spirits. She understood. Force was the language of a world that sought to possess. Wisdom was the language of this place. Instead of trying to command the vines or plead with them, she made a radical choice. She slowly sat on the mossy floor before the sealed archway, settling in as if for a long conversation. She closed her eyes, not to push her will outward, but to gather her truth inward. And then she began to speak. She did not recite a story from a book. She wove a new one. She spoke of her own journey, from the curious archivist, following a hum to the weary dream weaver mending broken narratives. She recounted her fear upon entering, her reverence upon understanding the stories were alive, her despair at the fading tales, and her solemn pact with the lynx. She detailed her collaboration with the spirits, not claiming credit, but describing the beautiful, shared effort of revival. She was offering her own experience as a new myth, a testament to her evolved understanding. As her quiet words filled the air, something shifted. The obsidian thorns began to glow with a soft, internal light, as if responding to the honest warmth of her narrative. One by one, they uncurled from the ancient stone, retracting with a sound like whispering silk, pulling back to reveal a passageway into the profound, waiting silence of the first dreams. The air within the Archive of Origins was still and cool, tasting of deep earth and the quiet before words. At its center stood a single, immense tree, its bark etched with the intricate script of countless tales. Its leaves shimmered, each one holding a complete world of myth and memory, and at the base of this primordial tree, resting on a cushion of living moss, lay a simple book, bound in unadorned, pale leather. Its title was a single, profound word, the first dream. This was not a story to be read, but the source from which all stories flowed. Elara knelt, her hand trembling as she reached for it. When her fingers brushed the cover, there was no projected landscape, no phantom narrative. Instead, a pure, overwhelming concept flooded her being, a silent understanding of the fundamental need to share, to connect, to make sense of existence through tale and song. It was the raw impulse behind every story ever told, the very reason folklore was born. The sheer weight of this meaning threatened to dissolve her own identity. Her mind, a single vessel, struggled to hold the ocean of all narrative. The responsibility was terrifying. With this understanding, she could potentially reshape the foundations of myth itself. She could dictate how every story must end, and force a single truth upon the beautiful, chaotic diversity of dreams. The power to become a master of stories, rather than their guardian, was a palpable temptation. But as the essence of the first dream coursed through her, she felt its core truth. It was not a blueprint for control, but an invitation to participate. Its greatest power was in its sharing, not its possession. In a moment of profound clarity, she made her choice. She would not take this story. She would not attempt to change or command it. Instead, she simply acknowledged it, letting its essence wash over her and then recede, leaving her humbled and reaffirmed. Her purpose was not to rewrite the rules, but to ensure the stories could continue to write themselves. By refusing the ultimate power, she avoided a conflict that could have unraveled the very fabric of the mythic realms. She chose to be a custodian of possibility, not a dictator of endings. As this decision solidified within her spirit, the entire archive of origins brightened, the light emanating not from the tree or the book, but from the space itself, as if in approval. The Somnus Lynx padded silently to her side, its form now interwoven with threads of the same primordial light that had filled her, a living testament to their shared bond and her wise restraint. A low rumble vibrated through the soles of her feet, a deep groan from the library's very bones. Before Elara's horrified eyes, the book, the leaf fox spirit, had nudged toward her just hours before flickered wildly. Its warm, steady glow faltered, dimming to a sickly, weak pulse. A fine dust of forgetting sifted from its pages, and for a terrifying moment, she thought it would dissolve back into nothingness right in front of her. The tremor passed, and the book stabilized, but the damage to her confidence was done. Her revivals were not permanent cures. They were delicate grafts, dependent on a constant flow of remembrance from a world that had already forgotten how to listen. Her work here was merely treating the symptoms, not healing the disease. A cold wave of despair washed over her, the fear that she was just delaying the inevitable, pouring her own energy into a vessel with a hole in the bottom. The beautiful, collaborative symphony of the narrative spirits now sounded like a frantic, desperate plea. How could one person sustain an entire ecosystem? The answer was both simple and terrifyingly vast. She could not from down here. The stories needed more than a single guardian in a hidden sanctuary. They needed roots in the world above. They needed to be spoken around campfires, hummed to restless children, shared between friends as secrets and comforts. They needed to live in the hearts of people. The decision crystallized with the sharp clarity of necessity. She had to leave. The thought was a physical ache. To walk away from this living, breathing wonder, even temporarily, felt like a betrayal. It was her sanctuary, her purpose given form, but staying and watching it slowly fade around her would be a far greater betrayal. She turned to the Somnus Lynx, her resolve hardening against the tide of her own fear. "I have to go back," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I have to plant these stories where they can truly live. I need to show you the way to the surface," she asked the guardian. The lynx regarded her, its nebula eyes holding a deep, ancient understanding. It did not question her. Instead, it padded to a shelf where several small, blank-paged books lay waiting. As she watched, the narrative spirits swirled around them, and the tales she had revived wrote themselves onto the pristine pages in shimmering, invisible ink. These were not the originals, but copies, seeds meant for sowing. She gathered them carefully, placing them into a satchel woven from moonlit moss. The weight of them was immense, not physical, but prophetic. The survival of this entire realm now rested on her ability to make the waking world care about its dreams. With a final, determined breath, she looked at the path ahead, a journey back to a home that might no longer feel like home, armed with nothing but a handful of sleeping stories and a hope that felt frighteningly fragile. Dawn light felt harsh and unfamiliar on her skin. Elara stumbled from the oak's roots into a world that seemed too loud, too bright, and painfully ordinary. The lingering scent of parchment and starlight clung to her, a fragile thread connecting her to the sanctuary below. Panic fluttered in her chest as the vivid details of the stories began to soften at the edges, their magic threatening to dissolve in the crisp morning air. She did not pause. She ran to her small cottage, her fingers fumbling for the key, and immediately pulled out her personal journal, a simple, leather-bound book she had once used for cataloging mundane acquisitions. Now she pressed the pen to its first blank page and began to write. The words flowed not as a dry recounting, but as a desperate act of grounding, of pulling the ethereal dreams of the library into the solid reality of ink and paper. With every sentence, she transcribed, first the tale of the starlit river and its ferryman, then the lullaby of the first dreamers. She felt the frantic disconnection in her soul ease. Each word was an anchor, a root driven into the soil of her world, and she felt her bond with the library stabilize, becoming a steady, quiet hum in the background of her mind instead of a fading echo. The true conflict began when the sun rose higher. Her daily life, once a comfortable routine, now felt like a flimsy costume she had to wear. Sorting through mundane archives at the village hall, listening to conversations about crop rotations and market prices, she felt the immense weight of her secret pressing down on her. The magic of the library was a constant, aching presence beneath the surface of everything, making the ordinary world seem like a pale imitation of reality. She missed the soft glow of the sleeping books, the cool intelligence in the Somnus Lynx's gaze, the collaborative hum of the narrative spirits. The longing was a physical ache, a homesickness for a place that was not, and could never be, her true home. How could she possibly bridge this vast gap between the monumental truth she carried and the simple, practical concerns of the people around her? The sheer scale of her mission threatened to overwhelm her. She could not simply stand in the town square and declare the existence of a mythical library beneath the ancient oak. They would think her mad. The stories needed a gentler introduction, a quieter way to take root. That evening, watching her young niece, Lyra, being tucked into bed, the answer presented itself. The child's room was cozy, filled with stuffed animals and the soft glow of a nightlight. This was where stories had always lived in the world above. This was where the magic could begin again. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. This simple, intimate act felt more daunting than facing a dream of a dying moon. She sat on the edge of the bed, took a steadying breath, and began to speak. She did not read from her journal. She closed her eyes and remembered the feel of the cool, starry water, the sight of the fairman woven from mist, the weight of the oar etched with constellations. She poured the entire memory of the starlit river into her voice, shaping it into a gentle bedtime tale. She watched Lyra's face, her eyes wide with wonder, her breathing slowing as she was pulled into the shimmering dream. The stakes of this moment were absolute. If the story landed as just another fable, if it failed to spark that essential magic of belief and connection, then her entire purpose was in jeopardy. The library's survival depended on these shared moments, on the energy generated when a story truly lives in someone's heart. As she finished the tale, Lyra's eyes drifted closed, a soft, contented smile gracing her lips. The child was already dreaming, her small hands twitching as if grasping for a silvery oar in a river of stars. In the profound quiet of the room, Elara felt it. A faint, warm pulse traveled through the floorboards, up through the legs of the chair, and into her very bones. It was a sensation of gentle warmth and profound approval, emanating unmistakably from the direction of the ancient oak. The story had taken root. It was a small spark, but it was proof. The connection had held. The library had felt the gift and was strengthened by it. A wave of relief and renewed determination washed over her. This was how it would be done, not with grand proclamations, but with whispered tales in cozy rooms, one dreaming child, one revived myth at a time. The small community center room smelled of crayons and wood polish, a stark contrast to the library's scent of magic and old paper. Elara arranged a circle of worn cushions on the floor, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. This was her first official Mythic lullaby hour. She had no grand plan, only the fragile seeds of stories in her journal and a desperate hope that they would find fertile ground in the imaginations of children. When the first young faces peered around the doorway, their eyes wide with curiosity, she felt the familiar hum of the library's approval in her bones. She did not stand and lecture. She sat among them, lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, and began to share the tale of the Somnus Lynx, describing its fur of woven starlight and its eyes like swirling galaxies. The room fell into a rapt silence, broken only by the soft sound of breathing. She watched as the children's own imaginations took over, coloring in the details she provided, making the myth their own. The results were immediate and profound. A young boy named Finn began retelling the story to his baby sister each night, adding his own details about the lynx's playful nature. A girl named Anya drew a picture of the lunar deity, her crayons capturing the silver light with astonishing accuracy. Elara soon felt it, a new and vibrant energy flowing back along her connection to the library. It was not the steady, ancient hum of the sleeping books, but a bright, chattering, joyful current, woven from the children's belief and their creative reinterpretations. This network of remembrance was growing, each child a new anchor point, strengthening the stories in a way her solitary work never could. The library was not just being remembered, it was being actively redreamed by a new generation. Yet this very success drew the attention she feared. A few parents and community elders watched her sessions with folded arms and skeptical frowns. After one story about the ferryman of the starlit river, a woman named Marta, who ran the local bakery, approached her. "They are charming tales, Elara," she said, her tone polite but firm. "But should we not be focusing on real history? These are just fairy tales after all." The words struck Elara with the force of a physical blow. Just fairy tales. It was the very attitude that had brought the library to the brink of collapse. For a moment, the old archivist in her wanted to argue, to present evidence and defend the literal truth of the narrative she carried. But she looked at Marta's pragmatic face and understood that historical debate was a battle she would lose. The truth of these stories was not in their factual accuracy, but in their emotional resonance. She made a conscious, shrewd decision. She would not fight on the terrain of reality. She would invite them into the realm of feeling. She smiled warmly at Marta. "Perhaps they are," she conceded gently. "But have you ever noticed how a good story can soothe a restless child or comfort a worried heart? That is the truth I am sharing. It is not about what happened long ago, but about what we feel right now." She pivoted her storytelling, focusing even more on the cozy, comforting core of each myth, the warmth of a shared lullaby, the safety of a guided dream, the joy of a mystery solved. She spoke of the emotional landscapes, not just the mythical ones. Her decision transformed the conflict. The adults who had been skeptical were disarmed by this approach. They could not argue with the peaceful quiet that settled over the children, or the way the stories sparked creativity and kindness. The mythic lullaby hour became less about belief in the fantastic and more about the universal human need for wonder and comfort. This shift, however, raised the stakes to a terrifying new level. The library's fate was now inextricably linked to the emotional engagement of her entire community. Her work was no longer a private, secret mission. It was a public service, and its success or failure was visible to everyone. She felt the weight of that scrutiny every time she stood before the circle of children, knowing that a single misstep, a story that failed to connect, could weaken the fragile network she was building. After a particularly resonant session, where she wove the lullaby of the first dreamers into a tale about overcoming nighttime fears, she walked home feeling the familiar, satisfying hum of renewed magic flowing back to the oak. It was stronger than ever, a chorus of energy from dozens of dreaming children, waiting for her on her cottage doorstep. Placed with impossible precision was a single, perfect oak leaf. It glowed with a soft, internal golden light, and as she picked it up, she felt a clear, undeniable pull back toward the ancient tree and the sanctuary hidden beneath its roots. The invitation was here. Her work in the world above had earned her a return. The roots sighed open once more, and as Elara descended, the change was breathtaking. The library's air, once heavy with the threat of silence, now shimmered with a gentle, golden vitality. The sleeping books pulsed with stronger, steadier light, and in empty spaces on the shelves, she saw them, faint, shimmering motes of light, slowly weaving themselves into the shapes of new, slender volumes. These were the children's own tales, the playful additions and personal myths born from her storytelling above, now taking physical form in this sacred space. The ecosystem was not just healing, it was evolving, fed by the fresh imagination of a new generation. A deep, resonant purr vibrated through the mossy floor, and the Somnus Lynx approached, its starlit form radiant with a contentment she had never felt from it before. It brushed against her, a cool and silken pressure, and the narrative spirits descended in a whirl of joyful light, their humming a symphony of pure gratitude. They wove around her in a dance of thanks, their touches like soft kisses of starlight on her skin. In that overwhelming moment of welcome, a sweet and painful conflict bloomed within her. The cozy warmth of her cottage, the trusting faces of the children during story hour, the simple satisfaction of a shared meal with her family, these were real and fulfilling. Yet here, surrounded by this breathing wonder, she felt a sense of belonging so profound, it was like remembering a part of her own soul. She was torn between two homes, two equally vital callings. The answer did not come as a choice, but as a synthesis. She did not have to relinquish one world for the other. Her purpose was to be the connection between them, a living bridge through which the magic could flow in both directions. Her life would be one of regular travel, of carrying stories down to be preserved and bringing their comfort up to be shared. This was her true role, and the realization settled her restless heart. Yet this beautiful resolution came with its own daunting stakes. Could she truly sustain this dual existence? The energy required to walk in both worlds was immense, a constant balancing act between the mundane and the miraculous. To fail at this equilibrium would mean burnout, and the carefully woven network of remembrance would fray from neglect. The mission's long-term success now depended entirely on her personal endurance. As if reading her thoughts, the Somnus Lynx turned and led her to a secluded alcove she had never seen. It was a nook woven from living roots and soft moss, and at its center sat a perfect miniature replica of her surface world cottage, complete with a tiny, glowing lantern in the window and a chair carved from smooth, pale wood. It was a space crafted just for her, a piece of her other home integrated into the library's heart, a silent promise that she belonged in both places at once. The hearth nook was a perfect echo of her most cherished memories. A small, magical fireplace held a crackling flame, not of wood, but of dancing story light, each flicker a tiny, silent scene from a myth. And before it sat a perfect replica of her grandmother's old rocking chair, its wood warm and smooth, as if it had been waiting for her for 100 years. This was not a place she had found, but a space the library had consciously, lovingly grown just for her. The moment she stepped inside, the frantic hum of her dual existence softened into a gentle, manageable thrum. It was an anchor, a point of absolute calm in the swirling currents of magic and memory, but such a profound gift came with a demand for an equally profound acceptance. Could she truly allow herself to be this deeply woven into the fabric of a magical realm, to accept that a part of her soul now belonged here as much as it did in the world above? The comfortable weight of her old life seemed to pull at her, whispering of simpler, safer choices. The conflict was not one of fear, but of identity. To sit in that chair was to accept a new definition of home. She made her choice. Elara settled into the rocking chair, its familiar creak a soothing counterpoint to the silent dance of the story flames. From a basket beside it, she pulled out skeins of yarn, the color of twilight moss and spun moonlight. She did not simply rest. She began to knit. Her hands moved with a rhythm learned from her grandmother, but the pattern emerging was entirely her own. Each stitch was a word, each row a chapter. She knitted the deep green of the forest where the oak stood, the the silver thread of the humming melody that had first called to her, the dark blue of the library's initial, intimidating silence. She wove in the starlight gray of the Somnus Lynx fur and the brilliant silver of the restored lunar deity. She was not just making a blanket. She was actively, physically weaving the story of her journey into the library's very tapestry. This act of creation was a declaration. By crafting her own artifact within these hallowed halls, she was cementing her legacy, making her presence a permanent, undeniable part of its living lore. Her story would now sleep on the shelves alongside the myths she had saved, a new, hybrid tale for future guardians to discover. As her needles clicked a soft rhythm, she began to hum the first lullaby, the foundational melody of all stories. The threads in her hands responded, beginning to glow with a soft, internal light. The colored yarns shimmered, and the blanket's emerging pattern seemed to breathe, its threads intertwining with the dancing light from the hearth, as if the library itself was leaning in to witness the birth of a new myth. The yarn in her hands hummed with the rhythm of the first lullaby, and a new idea began to bloom in Elara's mind. She thought of the children in her story circle, their faces alight not just with wonder at the old tales, but with their own unique imaginings. Finn had given the Somnus Lynx a playful star fox companion. Anya had decided the lunar deity loved to drink moonlight from tiny, glowing cups. These were not just fanciful additions. They were new dreams, simple and beautiful, born from the cozy, mythic realm she had helped them discover. They deserved a home here, too. Inspired, she began a new tradition. After each lullaby hour, she would sit in her hearth nook and carefully recount these fresh, fledgling stories, speaking them aloud into the library's listening silence. The Somnus Lynx would settle beside her, and as she spoke, its starlit breath would weave through her words. Together, their combined magic would spin the children's dreams into shimmering threads of light that coiled and condensed on a nearby shelf, slowly forming the soft, glowing covers and blank, expectant pages of a brand new book. The consequences of this act were profound and beautiful. The library began to grow. No longer was it merely a sanctuary for restoration, a desperate fight against decay. It became a living, breathing ecosystem of continuous creation. New, slender volumes appeared among the ancient, gnarled ones, their bindings the color of a child's favorite crayon, their pages pulsing with a bright, chattering energy. These were contemporary folktales, born from the intersection of ancient magic and modern imagination. The library's air grew richer, thick with the scent of both old parchment and fresh rain, the sound of both deep, breathing silences and bright, playful hums. This vibrant new life, however, brought its own delicate conflict. Elara found herself navigating the role of a curator. She felt a deep, instinctive need to ensure these new stories harmonized with the old, that their playful energy did not clash with or dilute the library's ancient, solemn magic. A tale about a giggling cloud that rained chocolate, for instance, needed a different home than one resting beside the Tome of the Silent Moon. She learned to listen to the shelves themselves, feeling for the resonant frequencies between stories, placing the new books where they could befriend and complement the old, creating a symphony rather than a cacophony. Her decision in this role was crucial. She chose to act not as a gatekeeper, but as a gentle guide for this new cycle of creation. In her lullaby hours above, she began to subtly encourage the children's own creativity, praising their unique ideas, while also sharing why the older tales felt so timeless and deep. She taught them that every new story stands on the shoulders of the ones that came before, and that respecting the old myths gives our new imaginings a stronger foundation. This balanced approach ensured a healthy evolution for the library, one that honored its past while eagerly embracing its future. The stakes of her mission had transformed entirely. The library's future was no longer in peril. It was secure, and more than that, it was ever evolving, a self-sustaining engine of mythic creation. Yet this vibrant new reality demanded her ongoing, mindful stewardship. Her presence was the gentle hand that tended the garden, ensuring that the wild, beautiful new growth did not choke the ancient, sacred roots. One evening, as she was organizing a new batch of dream books, her fingers brushed against a particular volume titled The Girl Who Sang to the Oak. It pulsed with a familiar, cozy warmth that felt intimately connected to her own journey. As she held it, a clear, undeniable pull resonated deep within her spirit, a silent summons she recognized instantly. It was time for another journey to the Archive of Origins. The path to the Archive of Origins was now open, the obsidian thorns remaining in their gentle, retracted state. Elara approached the primordial tree, the simple book, titled The Girl Who Sang to the Oak, cradled in her hands. This time, she did not kneel as a petitioner or a student seeking wisdom. She stood as a guardian, a creator bringing a new story home. With a reverence that quieted her very soul, she placed the book among the thick, glowing roots of the first story tree. For a long moment, nothing happened, and a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. Then, the air itself seemed to inhale. The roots shifted, not with a groan of stone, but with the soft sound of rustling leaves, and they tenderly curled around the small volume, drawing it into their embrace. Above, on a high branch, a new, slender shoot of wood pushed its way into the still air. It grew with impossible speed, sprouting a single, perfect leaf. The leaf was not green, but the color of worn leather, and etched upon its surface in shimmering silver was the exact image of the book's cover, a small girl sitting beneath a great oak. It was a formal, silent acknowledgement from the source of all stories. Her story, born from the old magic, was now part of the foundational canon. A profound conflict stirred within her. A surge of pride, warm and human, blossomed in her chest at this eternal recognition. Yet it was instantly humbled by the overwhelming presence of the tree, a living library of every myth that had ever been dreamed. She felt both immense and infinitesimal, a vital thread in a tapestry, so vast its edges were lost to time. How could she hold both feelings at once? Her decision was immediate and defining. She would not see this as a final achievement, a peak from which to look down. This was a beginning. The sprouting branch was not a trophy, but a new responsibility. She chose, in that silent, holy space, to dedicate the rest of her life to this endless, beautiful cycle. She would remember the old tales, create new ones with the children above, and share them all, ensuring the river of story never ran dry. The personal stakes of her mission were now absolute and eternal. Her life's work, her very identity, was now physically woven into the library's living structure. To abandon this path would be to sever a part of her own soul. As she turned to leave the archive, she glanced back at the wall of vines. The obsidian thorns remained soft and retracted, the passageway open. She had permanent welcome here, not as a conqueror who had forced her way in, but as a recognized member of this ancient family. Her footsteps were now a natural part of the library's own rhythm. The gentle rhythm of her knitting needles was a soft percussion beneath the library's quiet breath. Elara spent a day not on grand quests or desperate repairs, but on the simple, sustaining rituals of home. She read aloud from a book of cloud shepherd tales to a cluster of narrative spirits that bobbed like dandelion puffs near her shoulder, her voice a low, soothing murmur. She helped the Somnus Lynx reshelve a wandering volume about sleepy river stones, her hands moving in easy synchrony with its careful paws. With each stitch added to her story blanket, she felt the vibrant threads of her journey intertwine more deeply with the library's own essence, the fabric warming and glowing softly in her lap. Her presence here was no longer that of a visitor or even a worker, but a steady, calming influence, like a hearth fire around which the entire sanctuary could gather and rest. In response, the library seemed to exhale a deep, contented sigh. The moss on the floor grew thicker and softer, emitting a faint, sweet scent of chamomile and old paper. The shelves themselves seemed to lean in more comfortably, their gnarled wood smoothing into gentle curves, and the light from the sleeping books brightened into a warm, golden radiance that banished every last shadow. This was no longer just a repository of myths. It had become a true cozy sanctuary, a place of profound peace. The only tension was the gentle, ongoing kind required for any cherished home, the quiet work of maintenance, and the conscious choice to nurture the beauty around her. Elara made that choice repeatedly throughout the day, pausing her knitting to simply watch the drifting spirits, or resting her hand on a shelf to feel the steady, dreaming pulse of the stories within. She practiced gratitude, acknowledging aloud the peace she had helped cultivate, and in doing so, she nourished her own spirit as deeply as she nourished the library. The stake in this tranquil interlude was the preservation of this hard-won harmony. The continued health of this delicate, joyful ecosystem depended on these moments of quiet belonging, on the steady, loving attention that prevented the slow creep of decay from ever taking hold again. As the light in the world above would be softening toward evening, she felt the familiar, gentle tug in her chest, a summons not of urgency, but of purpose. It was time to return to the surface, to gather the children, and to lead that night's lullaby hour. The familiar scent of crayons and wood polish welcomed her back. Elara watched the children settle onto their cushions, their small faces turned up to her like flowers to the sun. Tonight, she did not tell a story from the ancient shelves. She shared a new one, a gentle tale of a little star fox who had lost its purr, a story born from Finn's imagination and woven into reality within the library's own hearth nook. As she spoke, describing the fox's journey to find its sound in a valley of whispering reeds, a palpable warmth bloomed in the center of the room. It was the magic of shared imagination, a cozy, tangible energy that made the very air seem to shimmer. She could feel it flowing from the children, from the nodding parents who had unconsciously relaxed into the narrative's comfort, and traveling like a current through the floorboards, down through the roots of the earth, directly to the waiting library below. She felt its strengthening pulse in her own bones, a grateful, nourishing hum. The only shadow in the beautiful moment was the bittersweet understanding of its fleeting nature. This magic, so vital and real, was not a permanent spell. It was a fire that had to be fed, a lullaby that needed a constant, caring voice to sing it. The story hour could not end with her. The realization crystallized into a quiet, firm decision. She would find and train a successor, another storyteller with a kind heart and a listening soul, someone to whom she could pass the mantle of this cozy ritual. The lullaby hour had to continue forever, a perpetual lifeline, tethering the world of wonder to the world of waking life. This was the ultimate escalation of her commitment, a move to secure the library's future, not for a season, but for generations. By building a legacy, she was planting a forest where she had once nurtured a single tree, ensuring the sanctuary beneath the canopy would never again face the silence of forgetting. As the children shuffled out, yawning and content, a little girl named Anya approached her, clutching a piece of paper. She shyly handed it to Elara. It was a drawing, rendered in bright, confident crayon, of a massive, sprawling tree, and there, nestled within its roots and trunk, clear as day, was a cozy, detailed library, its windows glowing with a warm, yellow light. The seeds had not just been planted, they had taken root, and they were already dreaming. That night, the Somnus Lynx padded silently into her hearth nook. In its mouth, it carried a single, crystalline acorn that pulsed with a soft, golden light, as if it held a miniature star within its heart. It placed the glowing seed gently into Elara's open palm. The moment her skin touched its smooth, warm surface, understanding flowed into her. This was not merely a seed, it was a direct offspring of the primordial first story tree, a gift meant for the world above. The link's silent message was clear. Plant this directly over the library's entrance. It will grow into a new anchor, a living gateway that binds the two worlds with roots and branches, making the connection permanent. The finality of the act settled over her. This was not another story to be shared or a dream to be mended. This was a physical, irrevocable act of creation. Once this seed took root in her world, the library would no longer be a secret she visited. It would become a fixed point, a semi-permanent feature of reality, forever altering the landscape of her life and her community. There was no hesitation. She closed her fingers around the warm crystal, feeling its gentle hum sync with her own heartbeat. This was the true culmination of every lullaby she had sung, every story she had revived, every thread of connection she had painstakingly woven. To refuse now would be to deny the very purpose she had forged for herself. The stakes were absolute. Planting this seed meant the cozy sanctuary beneath would always be there, a constant, tangible presence. It meant her role as guardian was now eternal, her life forever intertwined with the fate of the mythic realms. There would be no more hiding, no more returning to a life of quiet separation. With the acorn held tightly in her hand, its light seeping through her fingers, she climbed back to the surface as the first stars began to pierce the darkening velvet of the sky. The cool, dark soil yielded easily under her hands. Under the watchful eye of the full moon, Elara knelt at the base of the ancient oak and dug a small, deliberate hole. She cradled the crystalline acorn, feeling its warm pulse against her palm, a tiny, captive heartbeat. With a final, steadying breath, she placed it into the earth, her voice a soft whisper as she covered it with the rich, fragrant soil. "Thank you for the dreams," she murmured. "I promise to keep them safe." For a long, silent moment, nothing happened, and the tension of the weight was a tight string pulled taut in her chest. Had she done it correctly? Was the magic strong enough to cross this final, vital threshold? Then, a soft, golden light began to emanate from the buried seed, a gentle radiance that spread through the soil like liquid honey. Above her, the great oak let out a deep, resonant sigh, a sound of profound contentment that vibrated through the very air. Its ancient branches shimmered, each leaf suddenly edged with a subtle, silver luminescence. In that moment, any lingering doubt vanished. This was not just an action, it was an inauguration. She was no longer a visitor who came and went. She had become the guardian of the threshold, the keeper of the door between worlds, and she embraced the title with her entire being. The success of this single, quiet act meant the library's existence was now anchored, its future secured as long as stories were shared and dreams were nurtured in the world above. It could never fade into silence again. As she rose to her feet, brushing the soil from her knees, the earth where she had planted the acorn began to stir. A small, vibrant sapling pushed its way up, growing with impossible speed until it stood as high as her waist. Its bark was smooth and pale, and its leaves, already fully formed, were etched with glowing, silvery runes that shifted and danced in the moonlight. As she leaned closer, she could hear them, a soft, collective whisper of tales not yet told, of futures waiting to be dreamed. The sapling's leaves whispered of futures waiting to be dreamed, and Elara knew it was time to share the whispers. She found Leo in the quiet of the schoolhouse after the children had left, a young teacher who always had a story in his pocket and a patient ear for a child's secret. She did not begin with grand explanations. She simply asked if he would walk with her to the ancient oak. Under the silver-limbed branches, she placed his hand upon the sapling's warm, rune-etched bark and let the library's hum travel up his arm. His eyes widened, not with fear, but with a dawning, profound wonder that mirrored her own first descent. When the roots sighed open, she guided him down into the waiting dark, her voice a steady anchor in the cool, descending silence. The golden light of the main chamber washed over him, and Leo stood utterly still, his breath catching at the sight of the endless, dreaming shelves and the drifting narrative spirits. The Somnus Lynx flowed from the shadows, its nebula eyes regarding the newcomer with a deep, silent assessment. Elara felt a sudden, sharp clutch of anxiety in her chest. This was her sanctuary, the core of her very being. Letting someone else into this space felt like parting with a piece of her soul. Could he possibly understand the delicate weight of this place? Would his reverence match her own? She watched him, her heart a frantic drum, as he slowly reached out, not to touch a book, but to let a spirit made of autumn light brush against his fingertips. The lynx gave a soft, approving purr, and the tension in Elara's chest began to loosen. He understood. In that moment, she made the most difficult and necessary decision of her guardianship. She consciously stepped back, physically and emotionally, allowing Leo the space to form his own bond with the library. She would not hover or dictate. She would be a mentor, a guide who had walked the path first, but the path was now his to walk as well. True preservation was not about holding on tightly, but about planting the seed in another heart and trusting it to grow. The library's future was no longer a solitary burden she carried alone. It was now a shared responsibility, a harmony that would be built between two guardians. This made the sanctuary infinitely more resilient, but it also introduced a new vulnerability. Its continued health now depended on their ongoing cooperation, their mutual respect, and their shared commitment to the stories. She watched from the entrance of her hearth nook as Leo, with a gentle courage that filled her with pride, sat on the soft moss and opened a small book about a timid mountain spirit. His voice, initially hesitant, grew steady and warm as he read aloud. The narrative spirits, curious and hopeful, gathered around him in a shimmering cloud, their soft humming harmonizing with his words. Elara felt a profound peace settle over her, a deep and quiet joy. Her work had not just saved the library, it had created a legacy, a living tradition that would now echo through time, ensuring the cozy sanctuary beneath the canopy would never again face the silence of forgetting. The final thread was the deep, comforting brown of the ancient oak's bark. Elara, her hands now etched with the gentle lines of many years, pulled the yarn through the last loop, completing the story blanket that lay warm and heavy in her lap. It was a map of a life, woven with the silver of the first melody, the vibrant greens and golds of the revived myths, and the bright, chattering colors of the children's own invented tales. As she smoothed her palm over its finished surface, the entire blanket began to glow with a soft, internal luminescence. It lifted gently from her knees, hovering in the air of the hearth nook for a breathless moment, before it drifted toward the curved wall. The woven threads did not simply hang there. They merged, sinking into the very fiber of the library, transforming the wall into a living, breathing tapestry. The colors shifted slowly, the scenes within the weave moving in a silent, endless retelling of the library's great revival. Anyone who entered this space now would feel the history, not as words in a book, but as a tangible warmth, a story told directly to the heart. Her great work was done. There were no more desperate quests to save fading tales, no more tense introductions of skeptical newcomers to the magic below. Her role had settled into something quieter and just as profound. She was a fixed point, a wise elder whose very presence was a comfort to the narrative spirits and a guide for the new guardians who now walked the shelves. Leo and others who had followed managed the daily rhythm of the library, their own stories beginning to weave into the grand tapestry. The stakes of her mission had transformed entirely. The danger was not loss, but the simple, beautiful responsibility of stewardship. The goal was to maintain the vibrant, self-sustaining cycle of dreaming and remembering, to ensure the cozy sanctuary remained a place of peace for all the stories yet to come. Elara leaned back in her grandmother's rocking chair, the one the library had grown for her so long ago. A deep, satisfying contentment settled in her bones, as familiar and warm as the story flames in the hearth. She closed her eyes, not in sleep, but in quiet communion. Her breathing slowed, deepening until it fell into perfect rhythm with the soft, sleeping hum of the thousands of dreaming books that surrounded her. She was not just in the library, she was of it, a lullaby woven into its eternal, peaceful song. A low thrum, a vibration of pure potential, began to build deep within the library's heart. The air itself grew thick with the scent of fresh ink and blooming ideas, a beautiful, chaotic energy that made the very shelves tremble. This was not the silence of forgetting, but the roar of too much creation. All the new stories, the vibrant dreams spun by the children above, were arriving faster than the ancient foundations could integrate them. Their bright, chattering magic swirled in dazzling, untamed currents, pressing against the older, more solemn tales. The cozy sanctuary was not fading. It was in danger of being loved to pieces, its delicate balance shattered by an overwhelming tide of its own success. Elara felt the strain in her bones, a pressure that was both exhilarating and terrifying. This was the final test, and it demanded not force, but the most profound wisdom she possessed. She could not command this energy to be quiet. That would be a betrayal of everything she had worked for. She had to help it find its voice in the chorus. With a glance that held a lifetime of understanding, she summoned Leo and the Somnus Lynx. They stood together, a trinity of guardians, at the epicenter of the swirling narrative storm. Leo began to speak, his calm, steady voice reciting the foundational myths, the oldest lullabies that gave the library its structure and depth. His words were the bedrock, the steady rhythm around which the chaos could organize. The Somnus Lynx moved among the shelves, its starlit form a living loom, weaving threads of calming silver light through the frantic, colorful energy, guiding motes of brilliant, nascent stories toward the older volumes that could best teach them resonance and weight. And Elara, she did not direct. She listened. She opened her own spirit, feeling for the harmonies and dissonances within the beautiful tumult. She remembered the lesson of the silent moon, of weaving the new with the old to create something stronger. She reached out with her hands, not to push or pull, but to gently coax, to suggest connections. She would guide a tale of a modern, chattering stream spirit toward the ancient, patient myth of a mountain river, helping them recognize their shared song of movement and life. It was a symphony of coordination, a quiet, immense effort of gentle guidance. They were not architects building a new wing. They were gardeners helping a forest expand, trusting the roots to find their own way through the soil, while ensuring the oldest trees were not overshadowed. The work was exhausting, a deep mental and magical drain that required absolute focus and selfless trust in their shared purpose. The moment of transformation was not a loud crack, but a soft, seamless sigh. The swirling, chaotic energy suddenly stilled, finding its equilibrium. The trembling shelves grew calm, and then, with a sound like 1,000 pages turning in unison, the library simply breathed outward. A new wing unfolded from the living walls, not carved from stone, but grown from interwoven narratives. Its shelves were pale, smooth wood, and the books upon them pulsed with a fresh, vibrant light, their bindings etched with the joyful, imaginative patterns of childlike wonder. This new section was not separate. Its roots were deeply entwined with the ancient archives, drawing strength from them while offering its own bright energy in return. The library had not just been saved from a crisis. It had evolved peacefully and magnificently, proving that stories, when nurtured with a balance of reverence and joy, possess an infinite capacity for growth. Elara's life became a gentle rhythm of footsteps between two worlds. Her days were filled with the cozy warmth of her village, the sound of children's laughter during story hour, and the simple comfort of shared meals. Her evenings often descended into the quiet, breathing stacks below, where she would walk the familiar aisles, her presence a calming balm to the dreaming narratives. There was no longer a separation between her duties. Recommending a book to a neighbor felt the same as reshelving a wandering volume. Comforting a frightened child with a tale was no different from soothing a flickering story spirit. Myth and reality had woven themselves into a single, seamless tapestry, and she was the living thread that held them together. The library was no longer a secret she kept, but a quiet, foundational truth that hummed just beneath the surface of everyday life, as natural as the roots of the great oak itself. Its stories were no longer trapped in parchment and silence. They lived in the games children played, in the metaphors people used, in the quiet hope that comforted a worried heart in the deep of night. They were carried safely in the hearts of the young and the dreams of all who sought a moment of peace, their magic spilling out into the world in 1,000 small, invisible ways. And in her own small nook, woven from roots and memory, Elara would finally rest. The story flames in the hearth danced with silent, familiar tales, and the soft, sleeping breath of the library was a lullaby she knew by heart. She understood then that the great melody of folklore would never be silenced again, for it was now as enduring as the human need to dream and to connect. Her own journey, from a curious archivist to the guardian of the threshold, had itself become a cherished, cozy myth, a new story sleeping peacefully on the shelves, forever woven into the endless, growing canopy of dreams.
you.